The star did not behave like a star. It appeared first as a faint smear in the outer feed, something a graduate student might have dismissed as sensor noise, if her advisor hadn't walked in behind her with coffee and the weary vigilance of a man who'd spent 2 decades waiting for the universe to surprise him. "Run it again," Dr. S.A. said. Jules Harper reran the tracking solution. The smear sharpened into a line. The line became a curve. The curve became an argument with everything she had been taught. "It's breaking," she said, before she realized she'd spoken aloud. Across the control room, chairs creaked. A technician laughed once, too loud, then stopped when no one joined him. The screen showed a body interstellar by speed, by trajectory, by the cold elegance of its arrival, entering the solar system with a velocity that could only belong to something that had been traveling in the dark for a very long time. Comets did not break. Asteroids did not break. Things obeyed gravity, or they were not things at all. Dr. Osei leaned closer, eyes narrowing as if he could physically intimidate the numbers into honesty. "Confirmed deceleration against baseline," he said. Jules' fingers moved. The software produced its answer like a guilty confession. A clean, steady reduction in speed. Not a wobble, not a scatter, not an accidental drag from dust or solar wind. A planned deceleration. Osei exhaled. "Mark it as an object under active control," Sir Jules began, "because there were phrases you were trained to say and phrases you were trained not to say. If we're wrong on paper," he straightened. "If we're right in history." On a separate screen, the object's path adjusted again. Small corrections, delicate as a surgeon's hand. It was not falling in. It was arriving. Outside the observatory, the night was clear. Across the state, amateurs with backyard telescopes and children with cheap plastic stargazers were aiming at the same patch of sky. They did not know what they were looking at. They only knew it was new. The universe had added a punctuation mark. By morning, the headlines had found their favorite word, Atlas. They called it that because journalists needed a name more than they needed accuracy, and because some intern had noticed that 3I, third Interstellar, would not trend. 3I Atlas. It sounded mythic, heavy, like something that carried worlds. The feeds filled with grainy animations and earnest anchors. An interstellar visitor, they said, as if it were a tourist. A rare celestial phenomenon, they said, as if rarity prevented danger. People posted jokes. People sold t-shirts. People stood on rooftops with cameras and bottles and made wishes at a moving point of light, as if the sky still belonged to them. In a lecture hall, 2 time zones away, Dr. Elias Renn watched the same broadcast on a battered projector whose fan whines like an insect. His students were half present, half elsewhere, eyes flicking between the screen and their phones, their attention traded like cheap currency. Renn didn't blame them. Modernity had trained the mind to see everything at a distance. Catastrophe was a kind of entertainment, until it arrived with teeth. He clicked the remote and brought the image to a pause, a white dot annotated with arrows and speculation. "The temptation," he said, "is to treat what we don't understand as either miracle or threat. Both responses are emotionally satisfying. Neither is useful." A hand rose, lazy. A boy in a hoodie, bright but bored. "So what is it?" Renn considered the question as if it deserved more than the room offered. "Something that has meaning," he said finally, "even if we haven't learned to read it." A few students exchanged looks. Their professor always spoke like this, always circling language as if it were prey, always insisting that patterns mattered more than machines. Semiotics, the department joked, was the study of making plain things complicated. And in the hierarchy of real sciences, semiotics sat somewhere between astrology and interpretive dance. Renn knew what they called him behind his back. He also knew, with the stubborn certainty of a man who'd built a life around an unpopular idea, that meaning was not limited to human mouths. When the lecture ended, he returned to his office. It was a small room packed with too many books, the air smelling faintly of old paper and coffee left too long on a warmer. There were diagrams on the walls, bird call spectrograms, whale song harmonics, ancient trade glyphs from forgotten ports. He had lived his life assembling proof that communication was not always spoken. His phone buzzed with a message from a colleague. "Elias, please don't go on TV. They're calling it alien. We don't need your contribution." Renn stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then he set the phone face down and opened his laptop. In the Pacific, 1,200 miles from the nearest continent, Sergeant Kara Holt stood with her hands on the rail of an aircraft carrier and watched the sea. She had served long enough to distrust calm. Calm, in her experience, was what you got right before someone started screaming. The carrier was part of a ring, steel and aircraft and satellites and submarines. A muscle flexed around an empty center. Somewhere beneath the waves, Sonar had painted the outline of the visitor. A mass too large for comfort, too geometric for nature. The officers called it the object. The politicians called it the event. The sailors called it what sailors always called the unknown. Any change? Holt asked. A young lieutenant beside her glanced at his tablet. His face had the pale sheen of someone who hadn't slept. No emissions, no movement. No signal we can pick up. Holt watched the water. The sun was lowering, setting the surface on fire. Beautiful things had a habit of killing you if you got sentimental about them. Nothing doesn't mean safe, she said. The lieutenant swallowed. Ma'am, with respect, what do you think it is? Holt considered the horizon. I think it's in our ocean, she said. That's enough. On the flight deck behind them, sailors moved with brisk purpose, securing aircraft, checking weapons, rehearsing routines that made them feel less helpless. Holt's men cracked jokes, because fear demanded an outlet. One of them, a private with freckles and too much bravado, called out as he passed. Hey, Sarge, if the aliens come out, can I request a transfer? I hear Mars is nice this time of year. Laughter rippled. Holt didn't smile. You want Mars? She said. Jump. The private's laughter died in his throat. He nodded and moved faster. When darkness fell, lights around the carrier dimmed. The sea became a black plain. Somewhere far off, a civilian vessel flashed briefly before being turned away by a patrol craft. Holt imagined all the people at home watching the sky, pointing at Atlas, pretending distance was a shield. At 3:14, the ship shuddered. It was subtle, more felt than seen, but every trained body on deck stiffened at once. Holt's hand went instinctively to the railing. Report. A voice crackled over the radio. Seismic anomaly. Repeat. Seismic anomaly. Origin within the exclusion zone. Another tremor followed, then another, like the slow testing of a lock. The lieutenant's eyes widened. It's moving. Holt's jaw tightened. No, she said. The ship's moving. The water's moving. That's different. She turned toward the bridge. Sound general quarters, she ordered. The alarm began to howl through steel corridors. Men and women ran to stations. Engines throbbed. The carrier's deck lights snapped to red, bathing faces in the color of old blood. Below the waves, unseen to human eyes, the ocean floor vibrated with a rhythm to clean, to be, chance. Far inland, Marisol Vega woke to her daughter's small hand shaking her shoulder. Mama, Anna whispered. I heard the dishes. Marisol sat up, heart already sprinting. Her little house creaked in the night wind, but the tremor beneath it was different. Like something passing under the earth, heavy and patient. She swung her legs out of bed and crossed to the window. The ocean was visible from here, just a line of darkness beyond the palm trees. The night was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that didn't belong to the tropics, where the sea always had a voice. Her neighbor's light flicked on. Someone shouted down the street in a language sharp with fear. Marisol pressed her forehead to the glass. She didn't see anything. That was the worst part. When danger was visible, you could run from it. When it hid, you could only guess. Anna stood behind her, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Is it the monster? She asked. Marisol forced her voice steady. No, she lied. It's just the earth. Anna looked up. Why is the earth scared? Marisol didn't answer, because she was asking herself the same question. In his office, Elias Renn was still awake. He had been tracking the public feeds, the academic updates, the government statements, carefully cleaned of anything that sounded like panic. He should have been grading. He should have been sleeping. He should have been doing anything other than watching the world inch toward the edge of something it didn't understand. Then, at 3:16 Pacific time, an amateur seismology forum posted a screenshot. A waveform, clean spikes, regular intervals. Renn's breath caught. He enlarged it, hands shaking slightly, and stared at the pattern the way a linguist stared at an unknown script. Not random, not natural, not noise. A knock came at his door. 3 quick taps. Renn ignored it. Whoever it was, knocked again, harder. Elias. A voice called through the door. A colleague, are you awake? Renn didn't answer. He was listening. The tremors came again, spaced evenly with a pause between clusters, like a comma. In his mind, without permission, his old lecture notes surfaced. Meaning is pattern. Pattern is meaning. He opened a new file and began to mark the pulses like syllables. Across the Pacific, under the carrier's watch, the ocean began to glow, faint at first, like moonlight caught in deep water. On the sonar screens, the object's outline did not change, but beneath it, thin lines appeared, descending. The lieutenant stared. Ma'am, he said, voice cracking. It's growing roots. Holt stepped closer. The lines were too straight, too purposeful. They were not roots. Roots branched. These bored downward as if the planet were soft. She felt, for the first time in years, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since her first firefight. Not fear of death, fear of irrelevance. A voice came over the comms. One of the analysts trying and failing to sound calm. Command has authorized a new classification, the voice said. All units, be advised, the object is now designated a forward operating base. Holtz tasted the words, forward operating base. A military mind reaching for familiar shapes and the unknown. Forward, she muttered. Forward to where? On his laptop, Renn circled the pulses and whispered the answer before he realized he was speaking. Forward, he said, toward us. He leaned back, eyes burning, and stared at the pattern like it might open its mouth. Outside, the sky held Atlas's brightening line. Children still pointed, adults still filmed. The world still pretended it had time. But somewhere under the sea, something was preparing. And somewhere beyond Mars, beyond Jupiter, beyond the thin comfort of sunlight. 3. Atlas continued its slow, deliberate passages, if it had come not to visit, but to place pieces on a board.